Here we go.
Close reading gained popularity from the 1930s through the 1960s. The term has become associated with the methodical reading of a text. Close reading involves sustained multiple readings of the text. Each successive reading has a different purpose. New criticism theorists such as Richards, 1929, and Brooks in 1947 stipulated close reading as a rigorous, objective method for extracting the correct meaning of a text. Such a reading seeks to discover a text's explicit meaning by meticulously analyzing patterns in its language and the ways the patterns combine throughout a text. Close reading has gone through various incarnations through philosophical buttressing. Reader response theorists, critical theorists, and deconstructionists have all used some principles of close reading. Thus, advocates of close reading share a view that readers should actively examine text multiple times to grasp more and more meanings and to realize better and better how texts are constructed to communicate meaning. However, notions differ regarding which features of text construction to consider and how to consider them. Close reading is an educational practice that was developed for secondary levels of education. The research to show that it is effective at the elementary level is lacking. In literary theory, to read closely is to investigate the specific strength of a literary work in as many possible details as possible. It also means understanding how text works, how it creates its effects on the most minute levels. Close reading includes a productive attentiveness to text, a way of attending text to the interplay of saying and meaning. Yet, recommendations for conducting the methodical interpretation of text, referred to as close reading, vary in important ways. Advocates of close reading share a view that readers should actively examine text multiple times to grasp more and more meaning and to realize better and better how texts are constructed to communicate meaning. Okay. Things to remember. Close reading was developed in the 1920s. Seminal work that was that of Richards, especially in the work Principles of Literary Criticism. It was originally referred to as the New Criticism. Though close reading has been used in secondary classrooms for years, the research endorsing it at the elementary level has lagged behind. Close reading emphasizes the use of text-dependent questions.
Implications for today's North Carolina teachers. What is close reading? Close reading is thoughtful, critical analysis of a text that focuses on significant details or patterns in order to develop a deep, precise understanding of the text's form, craft, meanings, etc. Close reading includes using short passages and excerpts, diving right into the text with limited pre-reading activities, reading deliberately, reading with a pencil, noticing things that are confusing, discussing text with others, and responding to text-dependent questions. Selecting a text. According to Tim Shanahan, close reading is a multi-day commitment to a text. You want students to read a text that offers rich enough vocabulary, ideas, and information to read, examine, and discuss over those days without feeling like you're beating a dead horse. When choosing a text, you need to consider the three components of text complexity: qualitative measures, quantitative measures, and the reader and the task. Here's a graphic that shows how all those three work together. Under qualitative, you have text structure, vocabulary, knowledge demands. Under quantitative, you have the Lexile number. And under reader and task, you have the motivation, prior knowledge, experiences, etc. There are 3 steps in closed reading. The first read is you're looking for the key ideas and details. During the second read, you're looking at the craft and structure. And then the third read, you're integrating or doing an integration of knowledge and ideas. So during the first read, the key ideas and details, you set the purpose. Students read as independently as possible. The first read can be done independently as a read aloud, think aloud, or a paired or shared reading. It should be done without building background knowledge. Students should integrate their own background knowledge with the text as they read. Now focus on key details and ideas. Make sure readers know main idea, story elements, or key details that the author includes. Here are some questions that you can look at or use to ask during your first read. Some of the things are what are the key ideas in the text or story? Who, what, when, where, and why questions. What have you learned from reading this? You want the students during this time to retell the story, explain the main idea, and what the characters are, who the characters are, the setting, and the major events. During the second read, you're looking at the craft and structure. Select a portion or chunk of text that is close read worthy. Students reread a section that includes complex ideas. Should allow students to gain a deep understanding of the text. It should focus on author's craft and organizational patterns, includes vocabulary choices, text structure, or text features. Some questions to ask during this section would be, what kind of text is this? Is it a poem? Is it a nonfiction text? Is it a narrative? You want the students to be able to explain the meaning of certain words, especially the key vocabulary words. Have them look at what was the problem and solution. From what point of view was the story told? And how did the graphics help you understand the text? During the third read, you want students to integrate their knowledge and ideas. They should go even deeper. It requires students to synthesize and analyze information from several texts or media. And students record ideas on sticky notes, graphic organizers, or thinking sheets. During this stage, you want the students to be able to describe the characters, describe the settings, and describe the events. They should be able to use illustrations and details to describe the key ideas. And you want them to be able to explain how the author uses reasons and key ideas to support the main idea. And they can also compare and contrast the characters. These are only a few of the questions from each of the different areas. There are many, many to choose from. The following video explains how to choose a text for closed reading.
In this video, you will learn how to choose a complex text for close reading. As a reader and teacher, you're probably wondering, how does choosing complex text for close reading match the expectations of the Common Core State Standards and fit into the Learn-Zillion approach to literacy instruction? We'll start by talking about why close reading and complex texts are so important. The call for reading complex texts through close reading is found in the first shift of the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy. Understanding this first shift is difficult, so we'll start by reviewing where the basis for choosing complex text for close reading comes from in the Common Core State Standards. The Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy have a specific focus on close reading of texts. The Common Core State Standards provide what they call anchor standards that provide broad guidance for implementation of the standards from kindergarten through grade 12. Anchor Standards 1 and 10 bookend the rest of the reading standards and provide guidance for what students should be doing at all times when reading in all grade levels. Anchor Standard 1 states that students must be able to read closely, to determine what the text says explicitly, and to make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Anchor Standard 10 states that students need to be taught how to read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently. These two standards provide the basic guidelines for why close reading is so important. In order to achieve mastery of standards 2 through 9, students need to learn the text they are rereading well and provide evidence and justification when they're talking and writing about it. In the Learn Zillion model of close reading, we build on the call to read closely in the anchor standards and name them out as a process of reading and rereading. Learn Zillion focuses on teaching students how to read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently through guiding students in exploring and analyzing the text. We also believe that teachers play a critical role in the close reading process, using a variety of pedagogical structures to provide scaffolding for their students and their comprehension. The ultimate goal of reading and interacting with complex texts isn't to just help the student to read that one text successfully. Through reading and teaching with complex texts, our goal is to equip students with the skills, strategies, and habits of mind to read, comprehend, and show their comprehension of all texts at their grade level, both independently and proficiently. Before we move on to choosing a text, let's review the 3 aspects of text complexity. The 3 aspects of text complexity are the qualitative features, the quantitative measure, and the reader and task challenges. The first factor that informs text complexity is the quantitative measure of the text. Readability is best measured by computer software. Common quantitative measures include Lexile, Fry, and ATOS. The Lexile measures are shown here. The quantitative measure of a text will help you to determine if the text is in a suitable readability range for your grade level band. The second aspect that informs the complexity of a text are the qualitative features of the text. These features can be analyzed by an attentive reader. The Common Core State Standards include rubrics for qualitative measures in both literary and informational texts. Another common qualitative measure are the Fontes and Pinnell reading levels. The 4 areas of the qualitative measures are meaning, structure, prior knowledge, and language features. The third aspect of text complexity is matching the text to the reader and task. This is best done by a skilled educator, who should consider the emotional and age appropriateness of the text for typical readers at this grade level, and the possible purposes a teacher or student at this grade level could have for reading the text or for completing a task with the text. So now, how do you choose a text? First, you'll begin by zeroing in on a few texts that have the right level of complexity, considering the quantitative, qualitative, and potential challenges the texts and tasks could pose to readers. After you have narrowed down your possible texts to those that are appropriately complex, you'll think specifically about your readers and the close reading you're hoping to do with them. You'll reflect on your students as readers, including studying their reading data. Some questions you can ask yourself are, what types and kinds of texts have been complex for my students? Why were those texts complex for them? What specific reading tasks have been complex for my students? Why were those tasks complex for them? In close reading, your students should struggle and grapple with texts that are increasingly complex for them. Remember that close reading, as one aspect of a complete literacy program, is an opportunity for students to take reading strategies and turn them into automatic skills through instruction and practice. By the third step of choosing a text, you will be closer to finding the right complex text for your close reading. But remember, not all texts are complex, and not all texts are worthy of close reading. As you're looking at the text you're considering, ask yourself, is the text I'm considering worthy of a deep dive? And does that text require repeated readings for true comprehension? An ideal text for close reading is rich and contains many teaching and thinking possibilities. Not every text should be read through close reading. Close reading is just one structure within a teaching repertoire. There are some wonderful texts that you love that may not be good candidates for repeated close reading. Also pay attention to the length of the text. Shorter texts work best because with a complex text, the reader will need to engage in multiple readings. Constraining the length of the text allows the reader to focus on more in a shorter period of time. Finally, your last consideration is to think about your planned purpose for the text you'll choose. Purpose can include genre or type of text, such as a piece of historical fiction, a lab report, a poem, or an op-ed article. Purpose can also include areas of comprehension, such as craft, structure, key ideas or details, integration of ideas and knowledge, building world knowledge, and language. You'll think, are there any types of text or comprehension moves that I know I will be teaching next, or that I'd like to teach again because they've been particularly complex for my students? Teachers in content areas can think about their purpose for using their text in a content-specific manner. Your purpose can include aligning with an area of content you'll be teaching. You'll think, is there a text I've taught with many times, but that I'm eager to see through the lens of close reading? Is there an area where I've previously taught content but not comprehension skills for how to learn content from a text? Is there a text that requires rich comprehension skills that my students could apply to learn content from other similar texts? Now that you understand the role of close reading and text complexity in the Common Core State Standards and the LearnZillion model of close reading, and the 4 considerations for choosing the right complex text for your close reading: complexity of text, complexity for your readers, worth and length of text, and purpose for closely reading the text, you're ready to try choosing your own complex text for close reading.
There are 2 purposes for closed reading. It allows students to relate new textual information to their existing background knowledge and prior experiences in order to expand their schema. It builds necessary habits that readers need when reading a complex piece of text. These habits are identifying their own purpose for reading the text, determining author's purpose, developing their own schema, considering the thought systems of a discipline or genre. For example, a poem differs from a science article. Closed reading must be accompanied by other essential instructional practices. For example, the interactive read aloud and shared reading, teacher modeling and think aloud, guided reading with leveled text, collaborative reading and discussion, independent reading and writing. When not to use closed reading: when reading is easily understood and simply organized, and when skimming a text. The key features of closed reading is short passages, complex text, limited front loading, repeated readings, text-dependent questions, and annotations. Short passages should range from a few paragraphs to a couple pages. The text should be above the student's independent reading level, and it should limit the amount of pre-teaching and front-loading that takes place. Set a purpose, but do not have a lengthy discussion about the meaning of the text. Repeated readings. Each reading has a different purpose or question to be answered. Text-dependent questions or answers to questions require students to provide evidence from the text in their responses. Students must explain where they found the evidence in the text. Annotation. Students take notes on sticky notes. Circle or underline words or sections. Write notes in the margins. And this allows students to find the evidence needed when answering questions.
Closed reading and the Common Core. CCSS-centered curriculum guidelines focus on closed reading. As stated in the CCSS, today's students are asked to read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, to make logical inferences from their interactions with the text, and cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Closed reading of text is designed to produce a coherent representation of what the text says. According to the CCSS, students are required to actively seek the wide, deep, and thoughtful engagement with high-quality literary and informational texts that builds knowledge, enlarges experience, and broadens worldviews. The focus in the CCSS is on the acquisition of knowledge and expanding students' experiences and perspectives not the aesthetic response of the reader, the appreciation of the text structure, or the author's craft. The CCSS calls for a 50-50 balance between informational and literary text in grades K-5, progressing toward a 70-30 blend in upper grades. The standards also expect text worthy of close attention to present a staircase of increasing complexity. CCSS-based student assessments also emphasize close reading. Close reading is very important and should be done 2 to 3 times a week in the classroom. Close reading and gathering knowledge from specific text should be at the heart of classroom activities and not be consigned to the margins when completing assignments. Kate Ubra has taught high school students for over 14 years. She strives to teach her students how to think independently and go back to the text whenever they have questions. She agrees with the Common Core's emphasis on what the text says as a way into the study of a literary text. She says that her 2 favorite questions are, "What do you think?" and "How do you know?" These 2 questions make students think for themselves and prove their own answers instead of just waiting to get the correct answer. According to Ubra, the students learn more and take pride in their learning when made to prove their answers. This is what close reading is about, making students think deeper about a text. The Common Core standards suggest several genres of short text, both literary and informational, that can work at the elementary level. Many kinds of traditional literature, folktales, legends, myths, fables, as well as short stories, poetry, and scenes from plays enable and reward close reading. For informational works, try short articles, biographies, personal narratives, and even some easier primary source materials, such as Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, or sayings from Poor Richard's Almanac for your upper elementary students. Because children's listening comprehension outpaces their reading comprehension in the early grades, it is important that your students build knowledge through being read to as well as through independent reading, with the balance gradually shifting to silent, independent reading. The focus on close reading has caused many of us to reflect on how we teach children to respond to and analyze text. Especially for elementary grade children, how do we support them in developing their ability to closely examine text to develop nuanced understandings and arguments? According to Dalton, young readers can even use picture books for close reading. They can look at the pictures to see what content is in the picture, how the illustrator made the picture, and the color and layout of the picture. All these details give deeper meaning to the text of the book. For nonfiction texts, the integration of textual and graphic information is especially important because the graphics often carry a heavy content load. In the broadest sense, close reading is a focused rereading of a text in which you go beyond a basic understanding of the text. It may involve a passage or key quotation from a text or an entire text, depending on the length. We may reread with a general purpose, such as trying to analyze how the author uses language to evoke an emotional response. Here is a short video talking about close reading.
The term close reading is being used a lot more these days, and it's because of the Common Core. There's a real shift with the Common Core away from trying to talk about the child's experiences or the teacher's purposes or a dozen other things, but to really put the focus on interpreting the text and thinking about the text. So it's really the author's words that matter most in reading within the Common Core, and that'll be a shift for some teachers. Now the emphasis is really shifting, and it's, bring the attention to the text as quickly as possible and focus the students on figuring certain things out about the text. Because of the nature of close reading, one of the things that you'd expect to see more of is rereading. So you might read a text and then read it again to see if you can figure out more information about it. I think some teachers have students read a text more than once now, but it's more for practice. The idea of close reading would be that as you read it multiple times, you would be figuring out more and deeper information each time. So, let's imagine that you had the students read the text 3 times, which would be a huge amount in today's classrooms. They'd read the text maybe the first time just to figure out what the author was saying. Could you retell it? Could you answer simple questions about it? A second time, maybe they would read, and they still might pick up some details about what the author was saying. But the second time maybe would be a reading to try to figure out how was the text working? How was it organized? Why did the author make certain choices of words? Why did they leave out other words? And so on. Why did they tell you in the order that they told you? And trying to understand the craft a bit more, and maybe where the author was coming from. Maybe a third reading, and again, you could still be figuring out things, what it said still and how it was working. But a third time might be more of let's really think about what this text means to us. Let's try to, how would we value this? How does it connect up with other texts that we've read? Is it similar? Is it different? Does this author have a different point of view than some other author? Those types of things. And so in a close reading, that rereading becomes very, very important, but not as a practice kind of thing, but much more as an attempt to get more and more information out of the text. But the new standards, the real emphasis is on, can students come away with coherent understandings of what they've read and how those texts work and how those texts connect with other texts, with the idea that the more of that students know, the better able to take on new texts they're going to be. So it really is a very sensible kind of a shift, but what it means is that teachers have to make sure that when students walk away from that reading group, they actually know what that article was about, or that they really understood that story and could write about it or talk about it. In the past, we'd sort of read it and be done with it and forget about it. That's really off the table. We want that knowledge to go into students' memory, that they can use it as they go forward to take on new texts.